On this question and answer episode of Rock School Proprietor Podcast, we help a studio owner who's finding it challenging to get group classes going in a mostly private lesson studio. It's relatively easy to book private lesson students, but oftentimes when it comes to groups, there's a little bit more education to highlight those benefits that you just can't get in private lessons. And since groups are all Mandy does in her studio, she's got some great suggestions. Stay tuned. Welcome to Rock School Proprietor Podcast. I am John Kazicki.
And I'm Mandy York.
Mandy, it is good to see you. We are back on Zoom, not in person right now, but I'm excited about this topic. We got a question from another studio owner looking for advice, and it has to do with groups in group classes and filling those group classes. So I think this is right in your wheelhouse since your entire Music Together studio is based on groups. I've got some insight to offer because I do groups as well as private lessons at Michigan Rock School. So I'm going to lay out the question, not word for word, because there was a little bit of banter back and forth, but it's from Alex. I'm not going to include Alex's studio name, but Alex's studio primarily does private lessons right now. He said they're about 90% private lessons and roughly 10% groups. And the problem with filling the group classes is, he says they want to offer it, but they don't have the students. They don't have enough students to fill the groups. So they want to fill the classes so that their instructors also have full schedules. They don't want those instructors to have gaps in their classes. And they also want to do these group classes as kind of like month to month, as opposed to sessions like you do. You like when you do your groups, you do, I think it's 12 weeks. Is it 12 weeks?
10 weeks.
10 weeks.
10 weeks,
okay.
Yeah.
And so at your studio, you say, okay, new session is open. We're registering for this session. It is 10 weeks long. Do you have people pay for the full 10 weeks, or do they do installments? How's it work?
Yeah, they pay up front. They register for class, pay up front, and then we gather for the next 10 weeks. Yeah.
Okay. Question, because this might come up in the conversation. In your studio, when you finish that session, do you have a rough idea of how many of those families may decide to do the next session also?
Oh, I would say, I don't have an exact number, a good 75%.
Okay.
Continue. We have really strong retention.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So in this back and forth that I had with Alex, he also shared that they're not doing a set curriculum, but they're working on, and I'll add, with these groups, the goal is to do groups on piano, trying to do groups on guitar, and then also groups on ukulele. And there's not a set curriculum. And the hope is that anyone can sort of jump in at any time. So obviously, when you're working on those instrument-specific groups, each student or each person, each member of that group is going to have, like differing backgrounds and differing experiences. So I totally get the goal of being able to add people at any time. So I thought we'd kind of dissect this and maybe offer some advice for Alex.
Yeah, love this.
So
this is a good question.
Based on that, what comes to mind to you? Because again, your whole studio, you've kind of have this dialed in, like how to fill up the groups and like how to run the groups and how to schedule the groups and making sure, because you've got other instructors that work with you, how to make sure that their schedules are full.
Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts first before
this is all we do. Just groups. This is what we do.
Yeah.
And I hear Alex, right? Especially if he's just primarily private lessons. It is hard to fill group classes. I can see that. I mean, you want enough kids in the group to make it worthwhile, make it worth your teacher's while, so
Yes.
that not just for the teacher and the studio, but so that the participants are having the best experience too, right?
Right.
I would say,
That
um,
interaction, that community.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yep. So when you just get too registered for a class, that can be hard. It is difficult, but it's worth the investment. I think that's kind of something you have to think about when you're going into this. Like it's not going to be easy. It's going to take some time, but it'll pay off. It'll pay off if you put in the work.
Mm.
For example, in my world, I like to have at least 6 kids in a class. Now, I rarely teach a class with less than 10,
Yeah.
but 6 would be my minimum.
Well,
And
and I think
sometimes,
physical space, the room
mm,
with that Alex has to work with, I don't know how big it is, but
sure,
that's something that probably needs to be taken into consideration. Like, what is the maximum number of people I could have in this group?
yes,
And then from there, maybe figure out like, well, what's kind of like your break even point, so to speak, meaning I need a minimum of this many students for this
mhm,
class.
yeah, yep, which
Mhm.
is going to be different than what my numbers are. I'm
Sure.
sure he's probably not going to want 10 to 12 piano. I don't know, maybe, but it's different.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and piano, that would mean 10 to 12 pianos. That's a
Yes,
lot of
that's a
pianos in a
lot.
room. Yeah.
But for me, my that minimum is 6. I kind of go up to 12. But I will, especially when I'm starting off, 10 years ago beginning, or if I'm adding a new teacher, I go through this again, this growing pain, or if you're adding a different time of day, a different day of the week, even though I've been around a long time, adding these different days can create this kind of growing pain where you've really got to put some investment into getting families in for these classes.
Yeah.
I will, because I am a semester model, I'll s- I will accept, maybe 5 students,
Hmm.
even though I like to have 6,
Hmm.
and but then keep pushing my marketing, right? To
Right.
try and grow my numbers. And, oftentimes, that happens. You get people trickling in. I think getting creative with your marketing can help with this,
So,
right?
question about that. So, and I've done this too, where we run with a class, even though it might be fewer people than we want.
Hmm.
Like maybe you said you'll do a class of 5, even though your minimum is 6, with the hope of adding maybe some late ads.
Yep.
With your curriculum and your 10-week semesters, what's your cutoff point in terms of how many classes into that semester before you say like, nope, I cannot add anymore?
Yeah. It kind of depends on what my numbers look like. I never go later than 5 weeks in. 5 weeks
Okay.
would be my cutoff point. Some semesters it's 2 or 3, and then I just close. We're full, and in my case, I like to leave a little bit of wiggle room too because we allow families to make up in other class times.
Right.
So having a small class necessarily isn't terrible because I might have families visit that class from other, like, if
Yes.
they're sick on Monday, they'll come to that small Friday class.
Sure.
That makes
Sure.
sense. Yeah.
Yes.
So in my case, that kind of works. But let's see, Alex says he doesn't have like a set curriculum. I think that getting creative with that can help boost a group class. Maybe you don't want a formal curriculum, music together, kids rock, something like that. But what about giving it a theme, right?
Yeah.
You know, Uh,
Yeah.
giving it a theme that can go a long way with your marketing. And I do think setting a parameters on the timeline of the class, right? Even if it's just 5 weeks, I don't know, set a time and then have something, some sort of finale to that class. Like it's week 5,
Yeah.
we're gonna, play the song that we've all worked on together for our parents at the end of class.
Right.
No big
I
deal. And
agree.
then start
Yeah.
a new theme the next week.
I totally agree. And that was one of the things on my list. And, I get I get where he's coming from, but having a way to have some sort of ending point, because like what I do with Kids Rock, like
Hmm.
we have when we're about, we do performances about every 16 weeks, about every 4 months for Kids Rock, right? And
Hmm.
we'll be able to, and sometimes we have kids come in and they'll do a month and then they're out, right? So we kind of have an open door for new students on Kids Rock. And for those unfamiliar, that's our 4 to 7 year old rock band classes. It's only in the last about 5 or 6 weeks leading up to a concert where we'll say, okay, nope, we're not going to add any more people to these classes, but we can start to pre-register for future classes for those kids, right?
Hmm.
So after the concert. But I do agree that I think some way to have like a performance, or even if it's informal, to sort of signify this is like the end, this is like what we're working toward, this is the big end, the big finish, right?
Hmm.
To kind of keep people excited. And then also that will give people the opportunity to withdraw or stay for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
And then you kind of have this cycle that has a beginning and an end too, rather than like open-ended, like, and this is one of the issues I have with private lessons in general is like when it's open-ended, sometimes you have this circle that like people become complacent in, right? I
Hmm.
go to my music lesson on this day and then I go home and I'm supposed to practice and then I come back and like I'm supposed to get new stuff and it there's no, I don't know, with no end to that. There's a lot of responsibility on the individual student to make it exciting. So
Hmm.
so I agree. And that was
Well,
kind of
and it,
long-winded.
yeah, I agree with you. And there aren't a lot of kids activities that are drop-in activities, right? We sign up for a season of sports. We sign up for a semester of art, right?
Hmm.
And I think it gets the families to commit to this instead of trying it for 1 week and saying that's not for me, right?
Okay.
They
Yeah. And I loved your idea of the theme. What if, and I'm just throwing spitballing ideas here for Alex, but what if the ending was, that end point was maybe there was one song that all of the different instrumental groups were learning in their group classes. And that ending was, hey, it's not going to be just the piano groups, but it's going to be the guitar groups and the ukulele groups. And we're all going to play this song together.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Yep. And it gets everybody to kind of commit and see the project through to the
Yeah.
end, right?
Hmm.
I know in my world, I've had families come in week 1 and they're like, "Oh gosh, I don't know if this is right for my kid," right? But by week 3, they've given it a chance. Their kids understand the ritual and the routine of what we're doing there, and they're listening to music at home, and they buy into it.
Yeah.
So get them to commit for however many weeks to give it a real try.
Okay. So
And
some form of ending.
yeah, I think that would be helpful in your marketing. You know, get photos of these groups.
Hmm.
Photos of what you've got going on are priceless. Like the kids making music together. They are hype up the benefits of that. Yeah. Like
Yes. Yes.
this is an exciting program, We've got whether, you know, there's benefits to group music making, to the social aspect of it, having, the age range maybe that you're
Hmm.
working with. That's great. Things like that. And then hype up with photos. I like getting out in the community, depending. Can you can you do kind of a instrument petting zoo slash, try out a group class at the library, or stop in on a, Saturday morning or Sunday afternoon and check
Hmm.
us out? That kind of thing can be helpful.
Yeah. So on the marketing, I've got some thoughts too,
Hmm.
because you mentioned the benefits for the students. And obviously, I'm a big proponent of like what those benefits are when it comes to group learning and
Yeah.
playing with others in a group. So I took a look at Alex's website, and the way that they have their private lessons and their groups presented, there's not a whole lot of differentiation between the two, right? So they're like everyone knows what private lessons are.
Yeah.
But I do think like hyping up those benefits of the groups, like you had mentioned, is huge. And I think there's definitely room to do more of that and present it as such. Because as it's presented on the website, it's more like, hey, we do 30-minute private lessons, 45-minute private lessons, and 60-minute private lessons. Also, we do 30-minute group lessons, 45-minute group lessons, 60-minute group lessons. So there's not a whole lot of differentiation between the two other than it's one-on-one or it's as a group, right?
Hmm.
So the length of private lessons, there's a comparable length for the group lessons. So I would suggest maybe don't offer the three different lengths of the group classes. Like make all the groups like 45 minutes or something like
Yeah.
that,
I think that makes sense.
So that's simplifying it for the parents when they go on the website. And, because then like right off the bat, they've got this choice. Okay, do I want 30-minute private lessons or 30-minute group lessons, 45-minute private lessons or 45-minute? There's six choices,
Yeah. Too
right?
much choice, maybe.
So, maybe narrow that down so that the groups are all 45 minutes. That provides logistically, it provides a little bit of buffer in the front end. Like if everything's going on the hour, the half hour, right? For the instructors, it provides a little bit of buffer to like maybe set up some things and like take some notes and prepare, with that extra 15 minutes from week to week. So that was one thing I thought about from looking at Alex's website. The other thing was I was looking at the pricing, and this was a big one for me because what I noticed is, and I'm not going to list all the prices because again, I think location, based on your studio location, pricing is going to vary. But all of the group classes are at least 30% less than the comparable private lessons. And if I'm like just looking at pricing alone, I don't think in Alex's situation, price is really an issue for his clients because he said 90% are doing the private lessons and only 10% are doing the groups, right? So I get like the lower price, the discounted rate for the groups is meant to attract people to the groups or maybe just present a less expensive option. But clearly that's a significant discount and his clients are not taking advantage of it. So I don't know if price is really a deterrent there.
Right.
I think they're willing to pay the private lesson prices. So there must be something else going on, is my guess.
Well, you could look at that as a parent too and see that, well, I could pay a lower monthly rate or lower lesson rate, but my kid's not going to get as much attention. This is
Right?
like a cheaper option, but I have to share the lesson time with somebody else.
Yeah.
When really, you don't need to lower the price that much because the kids are getting a lot more benefit from working in a group setting.
Yeah.
Highlight those benefits, We're going to, we might have a couple different instruments or whatever it might be. We'll be playing different parts. And then we're going to, like we said, at the end, give a performance of what we've accomplished. So there are some probably, in my opinion, greater benefits to the group music making than in the private lesson.
And whether or not they're greater from the client's perspective is up to them to decide. But I think just by looking at the numbers at Alex's studio, 90% of the clients are already paying the private lesson prices. So I don't
Mhm.
think they have a problem with, paying those prices. So I
Right.
don't think price is the issue. But again, as you said, highlighting those benefits, differentiating what is happening in these groups compared to the private lessons is, I think, what's going to set them apart and present them as not even a better option, although I do think there's lots of benefits there that are better, but a different option, right? So a reason why someone would choose doing these groups versus doing the private lessons.
Yeah. And maybe it needs, maybe it needs a different name too. You can get creative in that way. We've got private lessons and we've got, the super great guitar kid class.
Yeah, yeah,
Can't think of anything off the fly, right? Instead of group lessons, call it something else.
sure.
At least, I mean, that's something I would do when
Yeah.
displaying
Now,
it on my website.
so we've talked about the marketing, we've talked about the pricing, and we kind of touched a little bit about the Alex's responsibility to his instructors and filling their schedules. So let's circle back a little bit on that part. I get it. You want your instructors to feel like they're working. You don't want to have holes in their schedules. You want to, like, if you say, hey, we're going to do this great group class and it's going to be at this time and this is what we're going to do, you want them to be on board with that. So then if it doesn't happen, you're kind of like, that feels bad.
Been
So,
there.
right. So
Yep.
what advice or what are some suggestions to keep the instructors busy, to keep the instructors excited about this option when enrollment might be low as he's getting this going?
Right. Yeah, because like I said, it's a time investment. It takes time to build this.
Right.
And every teacher's different. I know teachers that can really rock a 3-kid class. They have the energy and they can have fun for 45 minutes with 3 kids. That's great. So maybe if this class is small, working with that teacher and providing some kind of training or insight on how to keep the energy going, keep excited, planning for a small group can be helpful. I know I've done that with my teachers before. I have never done this, but I do know directors that will incentivize their instructors. So they'll offer a bonus if classes get above a certain number of kids. So again, I haven't done this. I don't know. Maybe if incentivizing an instructor in that way, makes them a little more excited or makes them sell a little harder, if you know what I mean.
See, I don't know if I'm a fan of that, only because, and maybe this is just because of how my studio is structured, but my instructor, now I do, I pay my instructors prep time. I pay them more for doing groups because it involves more prep time, right? So that is built in, but it's not about the number of people in that group.
Right. And that's my setup too.
But like, I don't incentivizing for more students. I'm not sure I like that because then it's like, well, whose responsibility is it to get students in that class, right? Because if you got admin, if it's the studio owner, then it's their responsibility. It's not the instructor's responsibility, right? But I do think that in the short term, trying to get these groups going for Alex, it might have to just kind of guarantee that instructor is going to get paid for that time. Whether it ends up being 1 kid in that group or whether it ends up being a private lesson or whether it's 2 kids or like 4 kids or whatever that minimum number is.
Yep.
Have you had to do that with your instructors?
Have I had to do what? I'm sorry.
Well, if you've got a new instructor and you're trying to get their schedule filled. You're trying to, start a new class for them. You said 6 is kind of your minimum.
Oh yeah. Because it's just it's an investment. I'm investing in the teacher and this either, new class, new day, new time. Yeah, for sure. Right. You just have to do that. I think that you have to be sure that this instructor is a good group instructor too, right? Because I would think not every really great private instructor makes a really great group instructor.
Yeah.
So I know I have not personally, but know directors that have had teachers that have a really hard time filling classes. The other sections are full, the other times are full, but some teachers have a harder time with group classes. So that's the responsibility of the studio owner to make sure they've got the right person in there in front of the kids.
Yeah.
Or that they're getting the right training.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that's probably a whole other thing that maybe we don't want to open up that door.
Yeah. But you can't just say, so-and-so has an hour off. I'm going to open a group class at that time.
Sure. Yeah.
You got to make sure so-and-so is right for a group class.
Right. And in my studio, we've got training for the private instructors, but then we've got a whole different set of training for our bands and for the groups. So yeah, different skill sets, different ways of conducting those sessions. There's different responsibilities. Obviously, mine's a lot more complicated because there's performances and like other things that come into play that the group band coaches or instructors are responsible for. But yes, you're right. Different kind of training for groups compared to private lessons. Quick wrap up on suggestions for Alex. Number 1, marketing. Highlight those benefits. Give those reasons why someone would want to do these group lessons, and further differentiate what people would experience in these groups compared to private lessons, as opposed to it just being like another option. Create a theme. I love that idea. Or some way to kind of have some sort of end point. Informal performance, group jam, whatever, the theme. I loved that idea. I also think simplifying the options for those groups. So instead of having 3 different group lengths, like the 30-minute, the 45-minute, the 60-minute, maybe just offer one length. So again, further differentiating it from the private lesson options. And yeah, just be prepared to make that investment and with the instructors and say like, this is what we're going to do, whether we fill this class or not. This is you're going to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
Did I miss anything?
No. Make it exciting.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, because it is. Like
that's
playing music with other people, that's like what it's all about. It is exciting. Mm-hmm. You just have to remind your prospective clients that, that's what it is. Mm-hmm. Okay. We're going to wrap this one up. I really loved doing this. And
this was cool. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. I hope it was helpful. I would love to do more of this. So if anyone else has questions or problems that they have in their studio that they want us to kind of chime in on and just like brainstorm, I'd love to help. So reach out. info@rockschoolproprietor.com is where you can email us. And that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks, Mandy.
Thanks, John. Cool.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Both Mandy and I really enjoyed helping Alex with this challenge in his studio. And we'd love to help other people too. That's why we're doing this. So if you've got a question, if you've got a topic suggestion, if you've got a challenge in your studio, send us a message at info@rockschoolproprietor.com. We'd love to help you. Show notes and transcripts can also be found at rockschoolproprietor.com. I'm at rock.school.proprietor on Instagram if you'd like to connect with me there. You can also find me on LinkedIn as John Kazicki. If you enjoyed this show and gained insight from our conversation, then we count that as a win. All we ask in return is you pay it forward. Please share the show with someone you think needs to hear it.